I was pouring myself a cup of bitter coffee when the sound of her purse hitting the floor drew my attention. It wasn't unusual. Melissa was always rushing in the mornings, throwing her things together like she was late for a fire drill. But that morning, something slipped out. Something small, shiny, and horribly out of place. A pierced men's protection. It landed on the tile right in front of me. I froze. My name is Henry Whitmore, 56 years old, a man who still pressed his shirts before church and shined his shoes before walking into town. A man who thought dignity was something you carried with you like a well-tailored suit. For 3 years, I'd been married to Melissa, 35, vibrant, always laughing too loudly in restaurants, always needing the world to see her. I thought she needed me too. That morning, staring at that torn piece of rubber like it was evidence in a crime scene, I realized how wrong I was. She rushed to pick it up, her hands fumbling, her face pale. "That's not mine," she muttered. "Not hers, not ours. We hadn't needed one of those in years. Not since the doctor told me I'd never father children again after a complication in my late 40s. Our intimacy had no need for that kind of protection." My gut twisted. I didn't say a word. Silence can be sharper than shouting. She went off to work pretending nothing happened, while I sat at the table staring at my coffee until it was cold. Later that night, I looked at her differently. She chattered about her day, but I only heard the sound of betrayal. The first slice of humiliation had cut deep, but I wasn't going to bleed openly. Not yet. That night, lying next to her, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly and thought, this house may be mine, but the woman beside me isn't anymore. Melissa's betrayal didn't come in a dramatic confession. It came in fragments. Late nights at the office that didn't match the company's schedule, perfume on her clothes that wasn't hers, a smile in her eyes when she texted someone she thought I didn't notice. And then, the final dagger. 9 months later, she announced she was pregnant. The room tilted. My first thought wasn't joy but a cold, certain rage. I knew biology well enough. That child wasn't mine. "But isn't this wonderful, Henry?" she said, her hands pressed against her belly as if cradling a prize. A miracle, after everything the doctors said. A miracle, or a reminder of the man she let into her body while I was ironing my shirts and fixing the creaks in the porch. I smiled at her then. A smile I had to force. A mask stretched tight over my skin. Inside, a storm was brewing. Because if Melissa thought she had trapped me with this, she didn't know the kind of man I truly was. Looking back now, it was the exact second when revenge started breathing inside me. You see, I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg her to stay loyal or try to raise another man's child under my roof. My dignity was worth more than that. My plan was simple, but it would cut deeper than any scream. I would let her dig her hole with lies, and when she least expected it, I'd pull the ground out from under her. But first I needed patience. Melissa grew bold in her betrayal once the pregnancy began. She thought she had me cornered. "We're blessed," she'd say, touching my hand across the dinner table. I nodded, but inside I thought, "You're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything you tried to steal from me." It's strange how humiliation can sharpen a man's senses. I noticed every detail now. The way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she started buying new clothes without asking, spending money from the account I built with 40 years of sweat. She underestimated me. Most people do when you stay calm. But I had a plan that no one, not even myself, could have predicted. Before I continue, let me pause and ask you something. Where are you listening from? What city? What state? I'd like to know. Drop it in the comments, because this story, my story, is one many men and women carry in silence, and I want to hear yours too. Now, back to Melissa. I began gathering quiet evidence, bank statements, receipts from hotels she claimed were work retreats, text messages I retrieved from the cloud backup she didn't know I had access to. Every piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Every secret she thought she hid was another weapon in my hand. One night, she came home glowing, Her cheeks flushed as if she'd been running. "Work dinner," she said, tossing her shoes into the corner. I just nodded. I had the receipt already. 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine, 1 hotel room key. She thought she was clever, but I was smarter. I remember sitting on the porch with my old friend and neighbor, Walter, who had known me since college. He smoked his pipe, and I sipped whiskey. He didn't know the details, but he looked me in the eye and said, "Henry, a man can lose money, lose hair, lose years, but he can't lose self-respect. Don't let her take that from you." I nodded, and the seed of my revenge sprouted roots. But I almost stopped there. Almost. I almost told myself to just file for divorce quietly, walk away, let the world think whatever it wanted. But what I did instead shocked even me. I started treating every day like an archive. The hum of the house, dishwasher, fridge, radio, fell away as I cataloged the small betrayals into something that could be shown, not merely felt. I learned the language of receipts and timestamps, the grammar of digital backups and hotel folios. When you've lived long enough, you become an excellent student of human detail. The hairline crack in a witness's alibi shows up in the corner of a receipt. A slipped emoji is a confession if you know how to read it. I had all the tools I needed. I only required the proper patience to use them. First, the money. Melissa had been careless. She spent like someone testing a new freedom, as if someone else's wallet paid for the thrill. I transferred a chunk of our joint savings into an account under my name with paperwork neat and legal, the kind of thing you do when a storm is coming. I made sure everything had a paper trail. If she could betray me, at least I would not be left penniless on the sidewalk of my own dignity. I called our accountant, said there were questions about taxes, and advised postponing any withdrawals until we had clarity. He nodded, unaware he'd become part of my quiet blockade. Second, the phone. I'd accessed her cloud backups weeks before, a soft theft of truth. It felt odd at first, violating the sacred privacy we once promised one another, but what she'd broken by herself had made that promise a lie. Her messages read like a map of infidelity, coded phrases, late-night calls from numbers saved as work that were not work at all, names that vanished into nicknames when the messages arrived and reappeared as full faces in hotel receipts. I printed them. I dated them. I labeled them with the kind of calm a courtroom clerk has when they staple a motion. Third, the doctors. Melissa liked the drama of a miracle pregnancy. She liked telling people the doctors were wrong, that life surprised us. She loved the look on strangers' faces when she said the word miracle. I called the clinic where she'd had her first prenatal exam. No police, no threats, only the neutral tone of a man asking questions about records. The woman on the line confirmed dates, confirmed ultrasound times. I asked without emotion whether a paternity test would be standard if the parents requested it, and she answered like a trained bureaucrat. Yes, it can be done. I learned the timelines that day. 9 months has a rhythm. A paternity test has a window. The world had natural laws. I would use them. I told no one. I preferred my plot to mature in the dark. Silence is a theater where the loudest plays are written. People kept asking if everything was okay. "We're fine," I'd say, and my voice carried the exact weight of a man who had practiced 1,000 times how not to give anything away. But patience is a tricky thing. It requires you to be boring in the eyes of others while you are building something clever. The day I chose was ordinary, which made it devastating. She'd come home from an appointment, the sort of prenatal visit she loved, light on her feet, as if carrying life made her lighter. She told me about a fetal heartbeat, the way her voice trembled with delight. "Isn't it incredible, Henry?" she asked, eyes shining. I watched her place her palm over the swell of her abdomen as if petting the final act of a betrayal into shape. Later that evening, I invited a few people over. Not many. Walter, who'd been my friend for decades. Diane, my sister, a woman who understood the fine laws of familial honor, and a lawyer I'd retained under the pretense of revising a will. They arrived expecting a quiet dinner. Melissa assumed the same. She put on a sweater that hugged her in a way that invited compliments and planted herself at the head of the table like a queen accepting an homage. The irony was domestic and delicious. I kept my calm, poured wine without hands trembling, and let the room fill with small talk while my heart assembled its timing. Halfway through the meal, I reached for my glass and cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but it pulled attention like a string. Before dessert, I said, "There's something I want to settle." The lawyer passed me a folder across the table. Inside were documents, the paternity test results I'd arranged discreetly through a clinic that did such things for couples seeking clarity, the bank records showing Melissa's withdrawals that matched hotel stays, and a printout of her messages that left nothing to the imagination. I watched her face change color in slow motion. "You arranged a paternity test," she whispered. Her voice tasted like bile and astonishment. She looked at the printed SMS thread and then at me, as if the man she once married had become a stranger holding a knife. She fumbled for an explanation, the words forming and unforming like birds trying to land. "Melissa," I said, and kept the voice even. "I trusted a lot of things when I married you. I trusted you." I let the sentence hang like a coin waiting for the cup to drop. "These aren't accusations without evidence. These are dates, times, and names." She went pale. Her hand trembled over her wine glass. You can't what?" I asked. "Be honest. Ask for forgiveness. Leave." My tone had no malice. It had only the quiet geometry of a man who had spent his nights measuring his options. Then I spoke the thing I had chosen to do that would change everything. I told her, plainly, that I would not raise another man's child under my roof. I read the paternity results aloud, the numbers dry and clinical, and watched as the color drained from the room faster than any of the wine poured that night. The lawyer slid a set of papers across the table: temporary separation, custody preemptive agreements, a settlement plan that favored me legally and left her with the burden of decisions she'd made in secret. "What about the house?" she asked, voice small now. "The house is mine," I said. It wasn't bluster. Years earlier, I'd bought the property before marriage, an old Victorian with my name on the deed. It had been a quiet point of pride. I'd renovated the porch, sanded the floorboards with my own hands. That made a difference. I'd taken care to keep certain things distinct, not out of spite but out of prudence. When you're older, you know how the world can change in a heartbeat. I had done the sensible thing, and in doing so, had given myself a lever. Her lip quivered. "Henry, you can't watch me." I folded the settlement packet and set it beside my plate with an air of finality. "You have two choices. Take what's in front of you, leave with dignity and a sum to get started, or make this messy and let the court decide. I won't stand silent while my home becomes a stage for someone else's story." She laughed then, a brittle sound that could have been a cry. "You're throwing me out," she said, as if it were the most fantastical thing she'd ever heard. I nodded. "I'm asking you to leave." She looked at the guests then, eyes wild for allies. There were none. Walter's face was a map of old wars and quiet judgment. Diane's hand rested a second on my arm, steady as a judge's gavel. The lawyer closed his folder with a soft click. In that click, the last little theater of pretense evaporated. She was alone with the consequences of what she had woven. That night I helped her pack. I say helped because it was important to me that no scene be staged. No shrieks, no broken plates. I carried boxes like a man carrying a burden he'd chosen to remove. She watched me with a crater of resentment where love once lived. Outside on the driveway, the headlights of a car cut a path of light across the lawn. She placed her small duffel into the trunk with economy and a bitter grace. She opened the door one last time before leaving and stood framed by the warm yellow light of the foyer. "You didn't have to make it like this," she said. "You made it like this," I answered. "You made choices. I made a choice too." She left before dawn, carrying the evidence of her life: clothes, a few framed photos, and a small stack of apology notes she'd once thought would be useful someday. The lock on the front door felt colder after she pulled it closed. I changed it the next morning with my own hands. There's a small satisfaction in practical actions, in the clinking of screws and the fitting of a new key into a new tumbling mechanism. It felt like the sound of a house reclaiming itself. People would call it vindictive. Maybe it was. But vindication has a softer face when the wronged person refuses to be small. I wasn't trying to ruin her. I was trying to refuse the ruin she'd offered me. I wanted to take back my life in ways that left me whole, not hollowed. As for the pregnancy, there would be tests. There would be a paternity suit, likely drama in court, whispers in the grocery store aisle where our names had once been spoken with neighborly affection. I prepared for those things with the flat, steady energy of a man who had rehearsed the future until it fit his palms. I sat on the porch that night after she left, the new key warm in my pocket, and felt something that surprised me. Peace. Not the loud peace of triumph, but a quieter thing, like the soft settling of dust in the corners after a storm. The house was mine again. Yes, but it was also a place I could stand in and finally breathe without the weight of an ongoing deceit. Looking back now, I realized that the wound had sharpened me. It had made my feelings clear as a blueprint. Revenge, in my hands, wasn't about spectacle. It was about retribution that repaired rather than merely punished. I had expelled her, yes, but mostly, I expelled the lie she'd wrapped around my life. But I had a plan that no one, not even myself, could have predicted. The thought landed like a seed. I had closed one chapter, but the book was far from finished. The next pages would not be written with fury alone. They would need wisdom, kindness to myself, and an openness to a future I had not expected to deserve. And in the quiet, as the porch light warmed the boards where I sat, I felt the first flutter of something I hadn't allowed myself to name in years. Hope. The days after Melissa's departure were heavy, but not in the way most imagine. They were heavy with silence. No footsteps upstairs, no humming in the kitchen, no perfume that lingered too long on the staircase. Just silence. Some men hate that kind of silence, but I didn't. I let it settle into the walls like fresh paint. It was my house again, stripped of performance and lies. Still, the world outside wasn't as kind. Small towns carry whispers faster than wind. At the grocery store, people paused a beat too long when I walked past with my basket. In church, where I'd been usher for 15 years, I could feel glances on my back as I guided people to pews. They weren't cruel, but curiosity itself has teeth. Everyone had their theories. Some believed Melissa had left me because of my age, because she wanted children, and I couldn't give her any. Others thought I'd been the unfaithful one. Few could imagine the truth, and I never gave it to them. Dignity sometimes means swallowing your side of the story. One evening, Walter came by with a six-pack. He sat in his usual spot on the porch and tapped his pipe against the rail. "You did the right thing," he said, not needing to say her name. "Doesn't feel right yet, does it?" I shook my head. "It feels unfinished." "Unfinished is better than unclean," he answered. "You cleaned house, Henry. That counts for something." His words stayed with me. I had cleaned house, but a man can't live forever in a cleaned-out room. Eventually, he has to fill it with something new. It was Diane, my sister, who nudged me toward the next step. She insisted I come with her to a charity dinner at the local historical society. I resisted at first. Crowds and polite conversation felt like walking barefoot over glass. But she pressed, and family has a way of wearing you down until you agree just to make the nagging stop. The dinner was predictable. Polite applause, too much starch in the food, speeches that ran 5 minutes too long. I was halfway through a lukewarm coffee when I heard a voice behind me. A voice that hit me like a door opening to a room I hadn't entered in decades. "Henry Whitmore, is it really you?" I turned, and there she was, Clara Johnson. I hadn't seen Clara in 30 years. Back then, she was the girl with auburn hair who read poetry under the elm tree by the library, the one who laughed at my corny jokes in college, the one I nearly proposed to before life took us in different directions. She'd moved away, married young, Lost her husband in a car accident 15 years ago, I later learned. And now, here she was, standing with that same auburn hair, streaked with silver, but every bit as radiant. Clara, I said, the name strange and familiar all at once. You haven't changed a bit. She laughed softly. That's a generous lie, but I'll take it. We slipped into conversation as if no years had passed. She told me about her work as a retired English teacher, her volunteer projects, her grandchildren. I told her what I dared about my work, my house, my sister. I didn't mention Melissa, not yet. That wound was too fresh to lay bare. But inside, something stirred. A warmth I thought had died. We exchanged numbers before the night ended. My hand shook slightly as I typed her name into my phone, like a boy again, unsteady but thrilled. That night, lying in bed, I thought, maybe the universe does hand out second chances. Maybe this is mine. I almost stopped there. Almost. I almost told myself not to call her, that it was foolish, that I was too old to start again. But what I did instead shocked even me. I dialed her number the very next evening. She answered on the second ring. "Henry," she said, her voice cautious but warm. "It's me," I said. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" "Coffee," she repeated with a smile I could hear through the phone. "Yes, Henry. I'd like that very much." We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind with chipped mugs and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I wore my best navy blazer, polished shoes, and she arrived in a simple green dress that somehow made her look younger and wiser all at once. We talked for hours, about books, about music, about our lives since college. We laughed, and in between the laughter, there were silences that didn't ache, silences that felt full instead of empty. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a man betrayed, not as a man whispered about in grocery aisles, but as Henry, simply Henry. As weeks passed, our coffees turned into dinners, dinners into walks through the park, walks into evenings on my porch. Clara had a way of listening that made me forget the scars. She never pressed me for details about Melissa. She simply gave me space to unfold at my own pace. One evening, as the cicadas buzzed in the humid summer air, I told her everything. The betrayal, the pregnancy, the evidence, the night I asked Melissa to leave. She didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine, and said, "You deserved better, Henry. But maybe you had to walk through that fire to find your way back here." Her words were balm. They didn't erase the past, but they reframed it. Looking back now, it was the exact second when love started breathing inside me again. Our connection deepened. We began attending church together, sitting side by side in the same pew where I'd once felt the weight of glances. People noticed, of course. The whispers changed, softened. "That's Clara Johnson," I heard someone murmur. They knew each other long ago. The judgment faded into curiosity, then into quiet approval. Even Walter, who was slow to trust, pulled me aside one day. "Henry," he said, puffing on his pipe, "I haven't seen you smile like this in years. Don't mess it up." I laughed. "I'll do my best." But life, with its cruel humor, wasn't done testing me. Melissa resurfaced, swollen with the late months of pregnancy, demanding money, threatening court, insisting I had responsibilities despite the truth. She showed up at my doorstep one afternoon, her voice sharp, her presence an echo of chaos. "You can't just replace me with her," she spat when she saw Clara's car in the driveway. "I didn't replace you," I said calmly. "I removed you. That's not the same thing." The look on her face told me she understood more in that moment than any courtroom filing ever could. She turned away, furious, and I knew the battle ahead would be long and bureaucratic. But I also knew I wasn't alone anymore. Clara stood beside me that evening on the porch, her hand brushing mine. "She can't take your peace, Henry," she said. And she didn't, because the revenge had already been served, the dignity restored, the truth revealed, the liar expelled. What remained now was not vengeance, but life. And for the first time in decades, I wanted life with someone. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and dust, the kind of place where truth is supposed to sit on the bench like a quiet witness. I walked in wearing my best gray suit, polished shoes, tie knotted firm. Melissa arrived late, belly heavy with a child that was not mine, her lawyer trailing behind her with a stack of papers and a look of rehearsed indignation. The judge glanced over the file, then at me. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "you contest paternity, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. My voice was calm, steady. The DNA test results were already in the folder before him. Clear, unambiguous, 0% probability. That child belonged to another man, though Melissa had tried to blur the lines of science with her performance of motherhood. She tried tears. She tried claiming confusion, miracles, errors in the lab. Her lawyer spoke of responsibility, of vows, of moral duties. But facts have a gravity that tears cannot overcome. When the judge read the results aloud, the silence in the room was louder than her sobs. The ruling spared me. No paternity, no child support, no obligation to play the father in a play I had never auditioned for. Melissa's shoulders sagged as the judge's gavel fell. I felt no joy, only relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't a story for headlines. But in a small town, news travels faster than ink. By the time I stopped at the diner for a slice of pie, 2 people had already nodded at me knowingly, sympathy stitched into their eyes. That night, Clara sat with me on the porch, listening as I recounted the details. She poured me a glass of iced tea and said, "Justice doesn't always feel sweet. Sometimes it's just quiet. But quiet can be enough." I nodded, letting her words sink in. She had a way of saying things that made me feel steadied, anchored. Life with Clara wasn't dramatic, and that's what made it beautiful. We started small. Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market, where she inspected peaches with the care of a jeweler, and I carried the basket. Evening walks through the park, where she told me about the poems she used to teach her students, lines she still remembered by heart. Sometimes she read them aloud to me, her voice soft in the twilight. One Sunday afternoon, we visited the cemetery where her late husband rested. She placed fresh flowers on his grave, whispered a few words I didn't try to overhear, then took my hand. "He was a good man," she said. "But life goes on, Henry, and I think he'd want me to live it." I squeezed her hand gently, "And I want to live it with you." Those were the first words that felt like a promise. Still, Melissa wasn't done haunting me. She called late at night, sometimes slurring her words, sometimes spitting venom. "You ruined me," she hissed once. "You and your damned evidence." Another time, she tried bargaining. "We can still fix this, Henry. The baby doesn't have to know. We can raise it together." I listened, but I never wavered. "The baby deserves truth," I said, "and so do I. Goodbye, Melissa." Then I hung up. One evening, she even appeared at my doorstep again, holding the newborn in her arms, eyes wild. "Look," she demanded. "Look at him. Don't you see yourself in him?" I looked. The child was innocent, a bundle of life with no guilt in his tiny fists. But he wasn't mine. I saw no reflection of myself there, only the cruel reminder of betrayal. "I see a boy who deserves better than lies," I said quietly. "Take him home, Melissa." Clara stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder. That touch was enough to keep me steady as Melissa stormed off into the night, clutching the child like a trophy she could no longer display. After that, she faded from my life. The calls slowed, the appearances stopped. I heard rumors of her moving to another town, of the biological father stepping in, of money troubles. I didn't chase them. Her story was no longer my story. With every passing week, Clara and I wove a new rhythm together. She filled my house with small touches, a framed photograph of her grandchildren on the mantel, a knitted throw over the back of my favorite chair, fresh flowers in a vase on the dining table. It didn't feel like invasion. It felt like a house becoming a home. One evening, I found myself pulling out an old box from the attic. Inside were relics of my younger days, photographs of me in college, yellowed letters, a dusty record player. Among them was a picture of Clara and me from decades ago, sitting under the elm tree, books scattered between us, her smile wide and unguarded. I brought it downstairs and showed it to her. She laughed, touching the corner of the photo. "We were just kids," she said. "Kids who didn't know we'd circle back here," I replied. She kissed me then, gently, as if sealing the years between us with a promise that time couldn't erase. Looking back now, it was the exact second when I realized revenge had given way to redemption. Life didn't magically erase the scars. There were still moments when I woke at night, remembering Melissa's lies, the humiliation of that night at the dinner table. But now, when I reached across the bed, Clara's hand was there, warm, steady, real, and that made all the difference. Walter came over one evening, pipe in hand, and saw Clara reading on the porch swing while I grilled steaks. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, damn, Henry, you didn't just clean house, you built a new one." I smiled. "With better furniture this time." The three of us ate together that night, laughter rising into the summer air, and I realized something profound. Revenge had restored my dignity, but love had restored my soul. And in that balance, I found peace. I started measuring time not by court dates or angry phone calls, but by small rituals Clara and I stitched into the days. Tuesday evenings became our bookstore night. We'd wander the narrow aisles at Whitman and Row, the bell over the door tinkling whenever someone new walked in from the street. She'd drift toward poetry. I'd get lost in old history hardbacks and biographies of men whose faces looked stern on the covers, but fell apart beautifully on the inside pages. We'd meet at the back table where the owner kept a chipped carafe of coffee that tasted like courage after 6 p.m. Saturdays belonged to the farmers' market by the courthouse square. I learned the names of people I'd only nodded at before. Miss Annie, who sold honey from jars labeled in her grandchild's shaky handwriting. The Gomez brothers with tomatoes that looked like summer decided to live forever. People who had once watched me with pity started greeting us with something warmer. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was welcome. I stood taller each week, the way a suit hangs straighter when the man inside it finally remembers what it's for. Some days I noticed details I'd trained myself not to see for years. The curl at Clara's temple when the air grew humid. The ridge on her index finger from decades of writing notes in margins. She read to me on the porch in the late light. Langston Hughes, Mary Oliver, sometimes the Psalms when the day had been heavy and we needed words older than us to bear it. Looking back now, it was the exact second when home stopped being an address and started being a person. We took our first trip together in the fall, a train to Charleston because flying felt too fast for love that needed room to breathe. The black rails gleamed like ribbon as the countryside opened. Clara packed a paper bag with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and I brought the good thermos. We played a game where we told stories about the houses we saw from the window, who lived there, what they cooked on Sundays, what they whispered to one another on their porches when nobody else was listening. Her imagination could make a world out of a mailbox. Mine could make a promise out of a cup of coffee poured steady, and then handed over without spilling. We walked the cobblestone streets like a pair of tourists who'd earned their rest. In a small jazz club on a corner that caught the dusk just right, a saxophonist in a blue suit poured honey into the room. I sat with my hand around Clara's wrist, the bones soft and bird-light, and thought, this is what steadiness sounds like. We ate shrimp and grits creamy enough to hush an argument and shared a slice of lemon pie so bright it made us laugh for no reason. We were not trying to be young again. We were trying to be honest at last. But life doesn't retire from its tricks. On the third morning, as the sun put gold on the hotel curtains, I checked my phone to find a message from a number I didn't recognize. A photo of me and Clara on King Street, arm in arm, with a caption that read, "Thought moving on would be easy." It was Melissa. The old ache tried to rise, but it was slow now, like a muscle out of practice. I stared at the screen and then I did something I wouldn't have believed possible a year earlier. I put the phone face down and poured Clara another cup of coffee. When I told her, she took a long breath, nodded, and reached for my hand. "She wants your attention," she said. "Don't give it for free." But I had a plan that no one, not even myself, could have predicted. Clara tilted her head. "What plan, Mr. Whitmore?" "To stop letting my past audition for a role in my future." We came home with a new rhythm. I hired a carpenter to repair the back steps I'd been ignoring. The house brightened under a coat of paint we picked together, something soft, like a cloud that knew when to make rain and when to pass. I cleaned my closet and let go of the last shirt Melissa had bought me, the one that always felt like a borrowed apology. In its place went a navy blazer that fit the way a right decision does. On Sundays, the church we'd both attended as kids became a different kind of sanctuary. The women who'd once looked at me with worried eyes started scolding me about not saving them a slice of the pecan pie at the post-service potluck. The men asked about my grill temperatures and pretended not to care when I beat them at dominoes in the fellowship hall. I began ushering again, this time with Clara at my side. She wore a simple gold cross and a smile with weather in it, sun for the cheerful, shade for the tired, rain for the ones who needed to cry without explaining. One evening in December, we hosted a small dinner. Walter and Diane came, along with Clara's daughter, Naomi, and her boys, 2 teenagers who ate like they were feeding third shadows that followed them everywhere. I cooked braised short ribs that fell off the bone with a look, and Clara made a skillet cornbread that carried whispers of her old Mississippi grandmother. The table filled with noise, the good kind. Someone knocked over a glass. Nobody got angry. I caught myself laughing with my whole face, not the small, polite chuckle I'd taught myself to use like a napkin. Midway through the meal, the doorbell rang. I felt my shoulders tense by old habit, but it wasn't trouble. It was Mr. Givens from across the street, holding a small box. "This came to my house by mistake," he said. He winked at me, and I'm nosy. Inside was a vinyl record player stylus I'd ordered weeks ago and forgotten about. After dessert, I brought down the old turntable from the attic, the same one that had kept secrets for 30 years. The stylus slid home with that tiny resistance that means you've done it right. The first record I played was a Miles Davis I'd found in a thrift store back when my hair had more to say. The trumpet filled the room and Clara leaned her head to my shoulder. The needle ticked like time remembering manners. We swayed without standing. "I thought I was done with surprises," I said into her hair. But life had one waiting right around the corner. Winter threw a few punches at us. A pipe in the upstairs bathroom burst the day the temperature fell like a badly told joke. At 2 a.m, I was under the sink with a flashlight clenched in my teeth, hands numb, trying to get the water shut off while Clara kept towels coming like a field medic. We laughed later when the plumber told us we'd done half his job. He fixed the line and stayed for coffee because the house smelled like something he remembered from home. There were smaller storms, too. A letter from Melissa's attorney arrived, an attempt to reopen the settlement by claiming emotional distress. My own attorney sent a response in language so clean it might as well have been detergent. When I told Clara, she didn't roll her eyes or cheer. She just made a pot of gumbo and said, "We'll eat while we wait for the quiet." And the quiet came. Spring slid into our town, leaning on a cane of dogwood blossoms. One afternoon, a package arrived from a cousin of mine in Baltimore. My grandfather's pocket watch. I hadn't seen it since I was 10, the day he let me hold it at the kitchen table, while jazz played on the radio and collards simmered on the stove. The watch was heavy in a way memory can't be. I wound it gently and listened to the tick like a prayer without words. On the inside of the case was an inscription I'd never noticed. "Keep time with your heart, but set it by the truth." I carried that watch for a week like a secret and then knew what to do. I called Naomi, asked for her blessing, then called Diane and Walter because some moments need witnesses who remember who you were before you became the man you are. I planned it simple. No spectacle. Just the kind of beauty that doesn't raise its voice. A picnic in the park where the oak trees made shade reliable enough to plan a life under. Fried chicken from Pearl's place because I knew better than to pretend I could match Miss Pearl's seasoning. Potato salad I made myself with too much dill because that's how my mother taught me. And the lemon pie from our Charleston trip recreated from a recipe we argued about until it tasted like us. Clara arrived in a blue dress the color of quiet mornings. I wore a light suit that made me feel like the best version of my father and the youngest version of myself all at once. We ate. We listened to a cardinal throw his song at the sky like a dare, and then I told her a story about my grandfather's watch, about the way the tick had sounded like forgiveness. When I opened the case, I'd tucked a ring inside, a simple gold band that looked like it knew the difference between promise and performance. I got down on one knee not because tradition insisted, but because my bones wanted to honor the ground that had held me when I fell. The grass pressed cool against my skin. Clara's eyes widened in that way they do when words take a back seat to breath. "Clara Johnson," I said, my voice steady. "Will you marry me and make a home with me that we maintain with tenderness and truth? I don't promise we won't have leaking pipes or burnt toast, or days when our bodies complain. I promise to set our time by the truth and keep it with my heart." She didn't cry right away. She laughed first, that deep river laugh that starts lower than the throat, and then nodded. "Yes, Henry," she said. "Yes." We didn't call everyone we knew. We called the few who had carried pieces of us when we couldn't. That night, the porch light seemed more golden than the bulb should allow. Walter lifted a glass and said, "To the man who cleaned house and then filled it right." Diane hugged Clara so tight it looked like a prayer you could touch. But I almost stopped there. Almost. I almost let the engagement float for months the way people do when waiting for perfection to arrive by mail. What I did instead shocked even me. I suggested a date 6 weeks out. A small ceremony in the church courtyard where the brick remembers every pair of shoes that ever scuffed it. The day came with lilacs in the air. I wore a tailored charcoal suit and my grandfather's watch-like armor that didn't refuse softness. Clara wore cream and carried a handful of wildflowers tied in ribbon that Naomi said matched the inside of the sky. The pastor spoke plainly. I liked that. He didn't promise us fairy tales. He promised us a road we could walk if we kept our hands out for one another. When it was time for vows, Clara added one line that made my throat ache. "I will be your porch in the storms," she said. I answered, "And I will be your steady chair." There is a quiet after vows that is unlike any other quiet on earth. It's the hush a room makes when it realizes it's being made into a home. The small crowd clapped. A child laughed at a bubble floating up from somewhere. A bee had the audacity to visit the flowers in Clara's hands and left satisfied. We didn't have a grand reception. We had barbecue in the church hall, ribs that demanded respect, collards, mac and cheese that insisted on a second helping, sweet tea bold enough to be remembered. Someone put on Al Green and the room did what a good room does. It forgave everything that happened before it existed. Later that evening, when we were alone, I gave Clara the pocket watch and told her to keep it when she needed the time to be steadier than her pulse. "We'll share it," she said, and slipped it into her purse next to a book of poems and a small bottle of perfume that smelled like citrus and clean feelings. The next morning, we drove to the coast again, this time as husband and wife. We didn't rush. We stopped at a gas station where the clerk told us his mama used to make biscuits the size of ambition. We sat on a bench by the water and talked about making a list, small pilgrimages we'd take. A museum in D.C. that held stories of our people carved into walls that refused to forget. A diner in Memphis where the coffee tastes like someone believed in you first. A march we'd attend next spring because being a black man who has known humiliation but chosen dignity is not just a private vow, it's a public posture too. That night, in the hotel, I took off my suit jacket and realized I had finally stepped out of an older skin. Clara traced the scar near my shoulder I got as a boy from a bicycle spill I'd lied about for weeks, until my mother found the ripped shirt and patched it with raised eyebrows. "That's how you love," Clara said, smiling. "You mend what tears. You don't pretend it never ripped." I kissed her, and let that truth live in the room with us. We came home to a house that no longer echoed. The porch swing complained in that friendly way wood does when it's doing what it was built for. I hung a new picture on the wall. The two of us under the church courtyard's oak, her eyes narrowed against sunlight, mine open like I'd just heard a good joke. The frame sat beside the old college photo we'd found months earlier. The years between them didn't feel wasted anymore. They felt like the road required to stand where we stood. A final letter from Melissa arrived in late summer. A short note. No threats, no pleading. She wrote that she'd moved, that the boy was healthy, that she was trying to be honest now. I put the letter in a drawer with other things that mattered once and mattered differently now. I didn't hate her. Hatred would have been an anchor in a year that had asked me to sail. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea and we sat. The day stretched its back like a cat. Somewhere, a neighbor's radio played a Motown hit and the chorus reached our porch without asking permission. I found Clara's hand and didn't let go. I almost stopped there. Almost. But there was one more thing to do. I took out a pen and wrote a note to my younger self, the one staring at a torn piece of rubber on the kitchen tile, the one who thought humiliation might be his last language. I told him, let the guerre sharpen your boundaries, not your tongue. Build a plan that repairs as it removes. Keep time with your heart, set it by the truth. Then I folded the note and placed it inside the watch case. Some future version of me will find it when another storm comes. The storms do come, but so does a woman who reads poems on porches, a house that chooses to hold your laughter, a town that remembers your best day instead of your worst. I thought revenge would be the punctuation at the end of my story. It turned out to be a comma, something that let the sentence breathe before the best clause arrived. And now, when I wake in the quiet and reach across the bed, my hand finds Clara's, and I know the rest of the sentence by heart. There comes a point in a man's life when the past stops shouting and starts whispering. These days, the whispers don't wound me. They remind me. I sit on the porch in the early mornings, coffee steaming in my favorite chipped mug, and I let the memories pass like neighbors walking their dogs. I nod, acknowledge them, but I don't invite them in. It's been years since Melissa left with that child. I've seen neither of them in person since the last letter arrived, though I hear things from time to time. He must be in school now, a boy with questions no one can silence forever. One day, he'll demand the truth, and I hope Melissa has the courage to give it to him. That's no longer my battle. My battle ended the night I showed the world her lies and asked her to leave my house. The victory wasn't in humiliating her, it was in refusing to let her humiliation define me. Revenge had been necessary, but not as a trophy. It was necessary as a door. And once the door was closed, I didn't keep standing there staring at the wood. I walked forward into Clara's laugh at the breakfast table, forward into the smell of cinnamon rolls she bakes on Sundays, forward into the warmth of grandchildren running through my hallway like they were born to fill it with noise, forward into quiet evenings where we listened to jazz on that old record player, her head on my shoulder, my hand resting where time feels steady. Looking back now, it was the exact second when I realized forgiveness is not about her, it was about me. I forgave myself for staying too long, for trusting too blindly, for not seeing the signs sooner. I forgave the part of me that thought love meant accepting less than honesty. And once that forgiveness arrived, peace followed like a loyal dog. My revenge was never fire and brimstone, it was exposure, truth as sharp as glass. But life handed me something even sharper, the chance to rebuild. Men my age aren't often given second chances in love. Some of us bury ourselves in silence, others in bitterness. I almost did both. But then Clara appeared like a chapter I thought the book had lost, and suddenly there were pages again. The funny thing is, revenge fades but love lingers. When people in town look at me now, they don't whisper about betrayal anymore. They see a man who carries himself with a steadiness that can only be born from walking through the fire and finding a way out. They see Clara beside me and they smile. I've thought a lot about dignity. It's not something people hand you. It's something you choose each day, in the quiet, when nobody's clapping. Dignity was refusing to be a father to a child born of deceit. Dignity was facing Melissa with proof instead of anger. Dignity was saying no when every part of me wanted to scream yes just to keep the peace. And now, dignity is simpler. It's washing the dishes with Clara at dusk. It's reading the newspaper on the porch swing. It's telling my story so that someone listening, maybe you, doesn't make the mistake of believing silence equals weakness. I know many of you listening have your own scars. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you've been humiliated. Maybe someone you trusted turned your life into a stage play where you didn't even know you were the fool. I understand. I've been there. But hear me clearly. You are not powerless. You are not finished. What they took from you doesn't define what's left for you. If you're carrying betrayal in your chest right now, let my story remind you that justice doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply showing them you survived, you rebuilt, and you found happiness they cannot touch. I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from? What city, what state? Leave it in the comments. Tell me if you've walked a road like mine. Because stories like these are not just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever felt the sting of deception and still had the courage to keep living. As for me, my days now are simple, and simplicity is wealth. I tend the small garden in the back, tomatoes and collards mostly, with a few sunflowers Clara insisted on planting. We sit in their shade when the sun grows cruel. I still polish my shoes on Saturday night before church, not because I need to impress anyone, but because respect begins with the man in the mirror. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and Clara has gone to bed, I wind my grandfather's pocket watch. I listen to its tick echo in the room. Each tick is a reminder. Keep time with your heart, but set it by the truth. That watch is my inheritance, but it's also my promise. The truth saved me. The truth freed me, and now the truth is what I leave behind. Not bitterness, not shame, not rage. Just truth. And love. Always love. I thought betrayal would end me. It didn't. It reintroduced me to myself. And when I found myself again, I found Clara waiting right there, as if time had simply held her in reserve until I was ready to live fully. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Life doesn't end at betrayal, or at 56 or at any number they try to tell you is too late. Life ends only when you stop opening the door to tomorrow. And tomorrow, if you're brave enough to claim it, can surprise you in ways you never imagined. I raise my coffee mug to you, wherever you are, whatever storm you're walking through. May your revenge be just, may your healing be steady, and may your love, when it comes, be truer than anything that tried to break you.